Hi, dear Brazilian friends. Um, this is Enya Schenk from New York City, coming to you with a research workshop. I am shocked and sad to see what the disasters are going on in your beautiful country, and I'm hoping the contribution of this workshop will you will enjoy and like it, and possibly, um, hopefully, this is educational. Um, I was fortunate enough to visit your beautiful country in 2018 and 2019, and I've made wonderful friends. And I hope I see some of you or all of you sometime in the future. I'm looking forward to visiting again. So, um, I'm Enya Schenk, New York City Pilates teacher. I used to be a teacher trainer for Power Pilates, working with Bob Leekens for many years. I have an exercise science and master's degree in exercise science. During my studies, I started to get involved into research, and Pilates research was, of course, one of my main passions at that time. My thesis was about Pilates and low back pain, and it evolved pretty quickly into a critical look at the current state of Pilates research. I've since then contributed and built a whole platform for Pilates research, which is called pilatesscience.org, introducing Pilates research. There are workshops on there for Pilates teachers. And it was recently sold to the amazing initiative Pilates Alliance Australasia, PAA. I will talk about this more in this very presentation and introduce their efforts in regards to health insurance reimbursements and Pilates, which is very interesting. Let's dive right into this presentation. I'll share my screen. Okay. So what is the current state of Pilates research? So the challenge for the Pilates method is that it's in itself, the method is not standardized, and there's no clear definition of Pilates. We can take a look at certain bodies defining the Pilates, what Pilates is. And even the main Pilates Method Alliance, which is the main organization, an international organization, but it's an American organization catering to international Pilates teachers. So they have a pretty broad statement here that you can read in the handout that is also available to you as a PDF. And interestingly, they're claiming that it has proven itself invaluable as a fitness endeavor, sports training, and physical rehabilitation. But on their website, there are zero citations to back up that claim. As an update, very recently, a few days ago, the Pilates actually created a survey for the scope and definition of Pilates, which is quite interesting, and it's dearly needed. However, this survey is really more of a general survey, and it would not really help to define or contribute to a greater standardization for Pilates in research, which needs to be much more structured and strict. So it's a great effort, but it won't really help all that much to get a little bit more of a standardized and organized clinical definition in Pilates achieved. Another in my search for the definition of what is our wonderful method, what is Pilates, I found this study, and this really I quite like, actually much better than the Pilates Method Alliance definition of Pilates. It's a study that tried to define Pilates for itself, looking at other papers, and their findings were they define Pilates as a mind-body exercise that focuses on strength, core stability, flexibility, muscle control, posture, and breathing, which are pretty dead on, right? Exercise can be mat-based or involve specialized equipment. Posture was discussed significantly. So these are all statements that are pretty dead on. So I really like the definition of this very study. Looking at Wikipedia, they take a definition from this. The middle statement is from the previous study I just introduced. And it's also a pretty broad statement, but there's really no, they're adding a couple of more terms to this, but there is really, all of these are really kind of random definitions. Going back, so that is one challenge. There's no definition of our method. Because of that, research has demonstrated very low validities, because it cannot be a modality that is not defined and doesn't have any standardization can also not be statistically analyzed, right? Research, in addition, is very scattered. So there's research coming out about all kinds of populations and about all kinds of comorbidities. Recently, I saw one about just Pilates and movement variability, about a population of post-prostatectomy, about obese women with lupus. So they are very scattered and specialized, but they don't really contribute to the broad body of work of Pilates. That may start with just its validity for fitness measures. Most research has been published about Pilates and low back pain, so that it has been shaped up quite nicely. There are 18 meta-analyses, which are is the gold standard of review studies. And Pilates has demonstrated, I also, on that note, I would like to point out that may be interesting to know that Pilates has demonstrated benefits, particularly in the following 4 domains. Specific strength that was measured, it was mostly abdominal strength, flexibility, balance, and quality of life. So these 4 domains you may want to note. Pilates research, even though the method has been around for quite some time, Pilates research is still comparatively new. Let's compare it to 2 big modalities, namely resistance training and yoga. You can see here, if we look at PubMed, which is the main medical database for scientific research, there are this many studies coming up in a simple title search for resistance training. There are 4,689 studies coming up for resistance training, for a little bit over 4,000 for yoga, and only 632 for Pilates. So of these, these are the gold standard. I will talk about this for single studies as well as review studies. Of these, 1,502 are randomized controlled studies for resistance training, and only not even 200 for Pilates. Now, when it comes to review studies, there are almost 270 for resistance training, 126 for yoga, and only 38 for Pilates. So in a summary, to summarize, Pilates research is shadowed by low validities, poor statistical analyses, because of a lack of standardization, and of what plays into that as well is that often the interventions are not even specified. They describe a certain protocol, but there is no definition, there's no outline, no description of the intervention. And if you look at the studies and you click on the interventions, some of them share photos, some of them don't even mention. They say it's Pilates or clinical Pilates, but they don't go into depth, or they don't explain what exercises have been done. Some explain it. Very few share photos or tables of the intervention protocol. And some of them just are simple movements that we know from physical therapy or yoga. So why is scientific research important for an exercise method? That defining movement strategies should be based on scientific facts and not on how they have always been taught. If you just look at the example of abdominal hollowing versus bracing, right? Research is really quite thorough. What is more beneficial for the other, and if we don't look at the body of research, we would still pull our navels to our spine. So that is an example about, how we can learn from science and the effectiveness of a certain strategy. We also want to know, is the method effective? But not because we just see it and describe it as effective, but has it proven? Is it quantitatively effective? And then in what domains? We want to make sure that the method is safe for our populations. So I'm just thinking about osteoporosis. We've long learned that flexion is contraindicated for osteoporosis, but to what measure? Should we eliminate all flexion and really water down the method to a degree where it may not even be effective anymore? Or is some flexion, beneficial if we do it with a certain strategy? So safety of a method. The method needs to be, or the modality needs to be recognized by medical modalities. They need to learn about it so that they can recommend it and prescribe it, and also to contribute to its popularity. And this is a big one that happens, as I mentioned, in Australia at the moment. Scientific research is needed for approval of a potential future health insurance reimbursement, because they need to see numbers to determine whether there is a benefit or not just claims. Now, with that, I would like to introduce you again to the Pilates Alliance Australasia, the PAA. They are going through so first, the initiative is to, with 14, I believe, other modalities, they are trying to get natural therapies, which is, for instance, it's Pilates, it's acupuncture, it's kinesiology amongst these, to get these modalities approved by the National Chief Medical Officer of Australia for reimbursement for health insurance. So that would be a gigantic step in Australia, and it would prove and help the rest of the world, because if it happens there, it makes it more feasible to potentially happen in other countries as well. The PAA is a great example of a governing body for Pilates that is very dedicated to organize it, to structure it, to support it. What this very initiative really shows. Now, how can we improve Pilates research? An initiative such as the PAA, who recognizes the importance for Pilates, for research for its method, is really the number one key. So we need an overarching industry organization, potentially an international one, that recognizes and drives the importance of scientific research support, fundraising, industry collaborations, because that means money. Research is expensive. The promotion of Pilates and academic institutions where a lot of research actually happens, as well as medical facilities. And also specific to our method, to continue to, bring the different lineage together. That Pilates, as you know, Pilates oftentimes kind of implodes in itself a bit, because everyone is fighting everyone what is Pilates and what is not. So the embracing of the different lineages I consider is very important, particularly also now that we have this new influence of mass equipment classes, which is almost another modern lineage, right? So, and bears the dangers of increased injury. Now, what has the main American, the PMA organization done for Pilates. What they do, they have a research committee that select existing studies, but there's not really any support. There's no financial support. There's no support. They select studies. They look at them, and they select them, and they get introduced in the annual PMA meeting. There are annual, like I said, annual research meetings during the PMA annual conference. They're introducing these studies. They have an updated research study list, which is actually not quite up to date, to my knowledge, when I looked at the website last. And it summarizes current Pilates research, but there is no, it's all passively listing, updating, etc., but there is no active effort to drive new research, to analyze any needs, or to generate financial support. Unlike the institution I mentioned earlier, the PAA, unlike also another example, the National Strength and Conditioning Association is an overarching institution for resistance training and for athletic training. So just as an example, they have their own peer-reviewed research journals. They award grants and scholarships to researchers. They have awards. They provide access to online databases because, it can be really quite expensive to read studies, to download the full paper, yet it is so important. They have, the national conference, they are research abstract presentations. They offer continuing education opportunities who focus on research. And the NSCA is a member of the research consortium of the American Council on Exercise. So this is just an example in how strongly, a solid organization can recognize and support its modality, in this case, strength and conditioning associated activities, for their field. So what are your thoughts? Do you prefer to improve the PMA efforts, or is it maybe possible to create a new potentially international entity? Is that feasible? Because we need it. Are there any other ways to help Pilates research achieve greater quality and standardization? Let me know. I'm interested, because we need to shape the future. So this was a general overview, and now I would like to get a little bit more practical. So that means these are a couple of slides that are important when you look at studies, and then I will show you a simple process how to find your own research if you're interested in a certain subject related to Pilates. And I also will make a few suggestions, 3 important suggestions that will help you to find what you're looking for. So these slides, they're a little dry. Research can be a bit dry, but there are just a few things that are important to look out for, that you don't end up with a study that isn't very valid. So what's important in research in general is the term parameter of reliability. So you want to have an environment that is as controlled and standardized as possible, but also as natural as possible. What plays into that, for instance, is the population. Does it really represent the population that is, affected by a certain intervention, right? Or is it just other college kids that are way too young, really, not really represent the age of a population? Is the sample size big enough? How are things measured? Are they just assumed, or are they really able to use the gold standards, such as when it comes to measuring strength, is it really muscle activation that was measured, which is very expensive and very invasive? So how was strength, for instance, measured? How close was the measurement to the gold standard? So that's important, the factor of reliability. And of course, the more reliable, the more expensive a study is. Now, when it comes to controlled means that if a study is uncontrolled, it just looks at the intervention. And if it is a controlled study, it compares the intervention to the standard treatment or to no treatment. So that defines single studies, and ideally they should be controlled, and they should also be randomized so that there is no bias occurring. So for single studies, the gold standard, single studies, just one study that looks at an intervention, analyzes it, statistically, hopefully, analyzes it. So the gold standard for single studies are RTCs, randomized controlled studies. For review studies, right, which do the job for you in a way, they look at what's already all out there and compare all the different RTCs, ideally, not lower level single studies, and compare them ideally statistically. So we have different types of reviews. These first two literature reviews as well as systematic reviews are not necessarily analyzing statistically, but meta-analyses, which are the gold standard for reviews, systematically comb studies and analyze them, their statistical measures. So this is the gold standard. RTCs for single studies, meta-analysis for review studies. Where can you find studies, single studies? They are published in scientific journals. And what's important there to note is these journals have what's called an impact factor. So that basically, in plain words, represents how important they are. So for the greatest body of work of Pilates in research is published in a Journal of Bodywork and Movement Therapies, and that has an impact factor of 1.34. And one of the big names in the industry, namely the British Journal of Sports Medicine, for comparison, has an impact factor of over 10, which is excellent, 12.68. Now, what factors matter if you want to effectively find the studies returned that you're actually searching for? And how can you limit the amount of studies that are being returned if you do a search? You can limit the amount of your work that you have to sift through hundreds of studies is, for instance, if you limit the time frame, for instance, what was published in the last 10 years, you can limit the language. You can limit your search term to abstract and title or only title. You should choose the type of study you're looking for. Of course, again, you start with RTCs and meta-analyses. And you can also find studies if you look at studies sources, which are always listed in the very end. And oftentimes it's very interesting to see what other studies based their discussions off and what studies they used. So the sources of individual studies are often a very interesting to read and use for your own search. Now, this is a quick introduction about Boolean operators. You don't even need to use them in PubMed, which I will show you in a moment, but it's just an FYI. So this is basically words that are used in a mathematical manner, right? And you can use them to return a search and make your search more specific in its returns, because you can add certain search strings. You can, define them more, you can limit them. So these are called Boolean operators. And you can even use these for Google, Now, one thing I noticed people often ask me is they're interested in research, but they're a little intimidated about it. So they don't like to do, they don't dare to do the search themselves. So because they are afraid that they not really know how to do this well. And that's why I want to take you through a simple process of how you can find your own your own answers to your research questions. The most important point is you need to make your question very precise. Yesterday, I received a question such as this. Do you know any programs for muscle imbalances? So now there's two things that we need to define in this question. And this is just an example of what happens often, in the question. So you cannot really, if you input a question like this into PubMed, you get hundreds of thousands of studies returned with the most exotic modalities. So you need to define your subject. What type of muscle imbalances are you looking for? Are they neurological, postural, strength, injury? What muscle imbalance you're interested in? Secondly, research does not return any exercise program. So what research looks at is exercise interventions, right? So you don't get a program returned, but it's interesting to look at what interventions did they use in research, right? So actually, that's why it's important to look at a whole study and not just the abstract and see what did they actually in these low back pain meta-analyses, what did the individual studies use as an intervention? How did they actually teach Pilates? And hopefully they did teach Pilates. Now, it is important, secondly, a second important parameter to do when you look for research. It is important that you read the full thing and not just the title and the abstract. Why? Because in the abstract is a summary, and a summary can go either way. So just by leaving things out can shape a really biased view of the current scenario, right? So you need to get a picture of the whole discussion. And secondly, this is where, in the full study is where you get access to the citations, right? So that's the beautiful list of other studies, valid studies about the same subjects that you are interested in, that these studies actually looked at. And you don't get that if you just look at the abstract. And also, just as important as the previous two, it is important to really look at the research for the whole, at several studies and one question. So that means it's not sufficient to just look at one study when it comes to, for instance, if your question is Pilates, and is Pilates effective for multiple sclerosis? If you look at one study, maybe even just one RTC that showed its success, that does not necessarily mean that Pilates is effective for multiple sclerosis, because we need to look at what parameters is Pilates effective for? What is it not effective for? What type of Pilates? There's so many questions. So you need to look at the whole body of research for a certain subject or a certain question to form an opinion. And oftentimes there is a statement made early on in research and everyone follows that. And then more and more research is coming out and the pendulum is often swinging to the other direction. And then oftentimes it just kind of ends up kind of in the center, but that's really, there are really dynamics to be considered when you look at certain questions in research. So for instance, the big spinal flexion debate. When Stuart McGill, a researcher out of Canada, came out with his low back pain books and studies, he basically took cadavers and bent their spines over and over and over again, animal cadavers. And so he saw after a certain amount of bending them, the discs just popped. So he assumed that the spinal discs have a certain lifetime, a certain amount of flexion, and then they're not functioning anymore. So that yielded to the fact that nobody really did a roll-up anymore, right? So spinal flexion was the big no-no. It was even taken out of the military protocols. And then there were other, researchers that looked at it from different angles. And now, we know the spine is made to move in all directions, right? So, and the pendulum was way swinging back. The same, so point is look at as many studies as possible when it comes to forming an educated opinion. Now, I would like to introduce you to PubMed. The main two websites you need to know is really PubMed, the link is here, as well as Google Scholar. It's Scholar, you just put Scholar in front of Google and you're in Google Scholar. It already strips out all the main articles that are just magazines and non-scientific. So if you have a question about a certain subject in Pilates, in relation to Pilates, you go to PubMed and you search, you do a search. The next few slides will show how. You try to search and click and activate meta-analyses first, because we want the biggest, we want to have the gold standard of all reviews. If there aren't any yet, because the subject is too new, most likely, look for single studies, but make sure you look for RCTs first, randomized controlled studies, right? So this is a screenshot of PubMed. Here you can see it's pretty straightforward. In this field, you could choose just subject. Well, that's how I often do it. Title, rather, not subject, title. If here's your example search term, you put that in and add and here you have your Boolean operator generated for you, right? Then you go, this is the next screen. Here you can limit the returns. Here you can click meta-analyses. You can click randomized control trials, right? Just to limit the amount of data that is returned to you. Now, this is a little bit of an illegal slide, because it shows you how to get studies for free, even though they're behind a paywall. This is a website called Sci-Hub, and it doesn't have a domain that's constantly the same because it is illegal, and so it needs to move its name around all the time. So the URL where to find it changes frequently, but here's where to find its current domain name. You can use the search function right there on the website, or you can make it a plugin for your browser. And this is a description of how to use Sci-Hub. Right, so here you can, so once you find the papers you're interested in PubMed, you can go to Sci-Hub and download them. Now, this is a new slide that I added because I often get asked now. So if I want to find studies, why don't I just use, Chat GPT? Why don't I use artificial intelligence? Intelligence. Why don't I use an AI to find my studies, right? So it does everything for me. I don't really have to do anything, but that's not really quite the case, because if as we determined, Pilates research has its limitations. So AI doesn't make that better, right? The limitations are still there. So artificial intelligence is something, is very valuable, but you need to understand what it is and what it's not. So artificial intelligence is a tool that helps us analyze gigantic amounts of data really quickly, much quicker than we could do it. And that's amazing. It can predict outcomes, and it can display human-like behavior, right, or capabilities, but it is still not a human. So it has to go a long way because it can match our creativity and our decision-making. And artificial intelligence, it doesn't have its own intelligence, really. It just basically parses a lot of data and pulls out what it its algorithms find most important. But that may not be what you, in your own search, would find important, right? So the quality of an AI response is thus really dependent on what you input into it. So the prompt itself, the question, AI question that you input, has to be very precise and very defined already. And oftentimes to make such a specific, precise prompt is almost sometimes often even faster to look for yourself and not let AI do the rest of the work, right? So that said, if you use AI to search, oftentimes it provides a nice and easy summary that sounds very convincing, but why? The question is, why did it pull out? Why did it get its information from a certain study and not from the other study? Oftentimes, it also doesn't really give you the sources where it pulls from. That's not good at all. So you want to make sure that you know the studies you're citing from. So I recommend using AI, using AI to refine your search after you started the search manually by yourself. So you could find a certain amount of meta-analyses in a certain place about a certain subject in relation to Pilates. And then you input into AI, why are these parameters like this and that in these studies? So you really literally mention the studies themselves. So don't give it all, hand it all over to artificial intelligence to shape your opinion, but do a little bit of field work and stay in control. Yeah, artificial intelligence still has a very long way to go. So thank you for listening. I hope this was helpful. Here are my social media handles. Please friend me, get in touch with me, and I hope to be able to visiting Brazil soon. And I'm praying for all the victims of the natural disasters that happened in your amazing country. A note, I chose closed captions in Portuguese. I hope this is somewhat working and is not just distracting and bad quality. And I would like to apologize that I don't speak Portuguese yet. Thank you very much. Bye.